Welcome to the CIONET podcast. My name is Hendrik Dekkers. I'm here today with Gunter van Craen, who's the Chief Digital and Information Officer at Bekaert, where he has been leading both digital and the Global Business Services division for the past 5 years. A very warm welcome, Gunter.
Thank you very much, Hendrik. It's an honor for me to be here and to participate in this podcast with you.
Gunter, when you joined Bekaert, IT was largely seen as a cost center. Digital capabilities were basic. Customer interaction was almost entirely offline. And now, 5 years later, you've driven a complete transformation across operations, customer channels, product innovation, enterprise systems, all that supported by a modern and a modular architecture. Now, if you had to identify one defining principle behind this transformation, what would that be?
Not easy to basically put it into one sentence, but I'll give it my best try. I think what I would say is it was a business anchor transformation that made use of a scalable, reusable architecture. And I think everything which we've done in the last 5 years has been driven by business outcomes. That was paramount. It's really the first thing which we looked at is the business outcome. And then we made sure that we enabled that with an architecture that is modular, scalable, so that we could reuse as much as possible and that we could ensure reliability. Because we started this initiative as a transformation, we had to build a lot of goodwill. So reliability was key for us with all of the components that we built.
Okay, so for now, in your early days, you encountered highly manual processes still, fragmented architecture, limited data-driven decision-making. Was there a specific moment where you realized really what the scale of the reinvention and the transformation, both on the cultural side and on the technology side, that Bekaert needed?
Yeah, I think that came almost 6 months into my job. I think I need to remind everyone or tell everyone that I joined in COVID, so I didn't really have a great time onboarding. I had some tailwinds as well because the new leadership as a CIO was really convinced that we needed to do something on the digitalization perspective, and that was absolutely fine. But after 6 months, when I first started to talk about how we could look at the customer differently, and when I was almost, laughed out of the room because we were not Nike, we were Bekaert, I think I realized the cultural change that we needed to go through, and that is kind of like a red thread throughout the transformation. It is convincing people on that the world is catching up with also big industrial companies and that we need to think differently. It wasn't so much a question or a concern in the operations field. Everything which had to do with manufacturing went very smoothly. Everything outside of manufacturing, daunted, was much more of a task than I would have imagined at the beginning.
Okay, now maybe let's first, give people some context. For those of us not familiar with the company Bekaert, could you describe what really the business is about and also the global footprint it has?
Yeah, so Bekaert is a company which is over 100 years old in Belgium. It's a multinational company founded in Belgium, still headquartered in Belgium as well. And we basically transform steel wire and coatings on steel wires for many end markets. So we are active in industries like automotive, but also in infrastructure, also in construction. Our portfolio is rather big across multiple industries. We have around 21,000 people working for ourselves. We are active in every country in the world, and we've got 75 plants in the different industries that we have. We're usually a local manufacturer, which has helped us a lot through some of the supply chain crises. So that means we buy and we make and we sell very locally. Hence, we have 75 plants. And we are doing quite well with the competition heating up a little bit from China. And we are trying to find a new spot for ourselves in the world as well, for another 100 years of legacy for Bekaert to be made.
Yeah, you talked about new leadership in the company. Was that what made them realize that they needed to trigger a full digital and architectural shift?
I think it was a comparison of benchmarks and a slow realization of a couple of people, both in the leadership and in the board, that obviously have some outside-in views and could compare with others on how they were basically creating a make industry. And then particularly, Bekaert has a very large footprint in China. We spend a lot of time in China, and you can imagine when you are in China, you can see the competition kind of like skyrocket on how they basically bring digital and now AI and other types of technologies into the production process, which leads to incredible lower cost of production. So I think that realization made it easier for me to go into a transformation. And that helped on the manufacturing side. But then we also had some more discussions with our customers where we saw that behaviors were changing from customers' perspective as well. And they wanted to have a different way of interacting with ourselves. And we needed to have some more glue to make our products more sticky into the market as well. And that's where the customer and the consumer type of models came much more available. So I think the realization came from a fast-moving world, ever fast-moving, and an outside-in perspective of us traveling around and seeing what the competition was doing.
Yeah. Now, if you look back a little bit on all the actual transformation that has been going on, we need to talk about a lot of different systems. About you modernized MES, you built digital planning, new customer platforms, reinvented product innovation with AI, and modernized the enterprise backbone. So maybe we can tackle these one by one. Shall we talk about the modernized MES first?
Yeah, I think that was the easiest one. So think about it. We created a program for about 5 years that encompassed all of the pillars that you talked about. And we did that top down and we scaled across the business units. I think, that was a premise as we went in, that it needed to scale across the business units. I think from operations, the easiest piece was convincing people that we needed to do more on the shop floor, that we need to do more on planning. And then particularly the buy effects that would give us on availability of data and the potential of bringing AI into the shop floor. And we've done that now consistently. All of our plans are either on MES or in the journey of having MES. We've deployed detailed scheduling. We've deployed sales forecasting in a specific tool that comes together into a data lake specifically for operations. And that allows us to actually manage our plans differently, more redundant, if you want to, less site-specific, and deploy much more technology and much more AI into problems which we were earlier unable to solve.
Okay. Now you said 70 or more different factories. So that means that I can imagine you had at the start was quite a fragmented world, I can imagine. So how do you do a big implementation of new planning and MES systems in a multi-factory environment like that?
You're right. It's 75 factories. And then if you overlay business units, which is kind of like a P&L structure, it can quickly become very complicated or complex. But if you kind of like take a step back, we only have 4 templates in which we produce and which we go to market, right? So I started to more think about the meta structure above all of that complexity to say either we make to order, we do project business and so on. And we created an architecture that was fit for purpose for each of those 4 business models so that we could scale very rapidly across the different BUs. And I think, that is something that in Bekaert, we've been able to do very well. If we can prove success in one business unit, then we can rapidly pivot into another business unit as well. Because honestly, the need is there. Everyone is under pressure and everyone needs to look for efficiency and activity.
Yeah. So that means that the culture is pretty centralized in decision power and then executed in the different factories.
In the beginning, certainly. And I actually drove the digital transformation top down. And I do have a lot of disagreements with some of my peers, whether it was the right way to do it. But from my perspective, it was the right way to do it to just get started. I couldn't wait for everyone to be consensus in and making sure that everyone's on the right page. We basically, with some top-level executives, pushed it down. But then after 3 years, we migrated much more in a bottoms-up type of exercise. And now I would say I'm not doing anything top-down anymore. We have now, obviously not with all of the plans, but I think with all of the leadership teams, every 3 months we discuss about what their digital assets are. We discuss how they perform. whether we would continue, whether we retire, and what we need more. And that's much more now a discussion that is tailored to each of the different individual business units, but still with an emphasis on scaling the good things that we've built before. And the nice thing, of course, with a scalable, reusable architecture is that your unit price of delivering something is going down dramatically by reusing certain things. So the conversation becomes much more easy because instead of talking about a 500K project, you're now talking about a 100K project. So cost is not really the pivotal conversation anymore.
Okay, so what you're saying is if you have a well-organized architecture and well-standardized platform and systems, that really is the foundation of
Absolutely.
then later on becoming, yeah.
Absolutely. My only conversations I have today is with the projects and the leadership teams that went first and kind of like got a double whammy on the investment. And they are always telling me, I invested on behalf of the company and then everyone is getting the benefit from that, which is a little bit true. And I have no defense to that. But we are now at this point that investment is really going to go fast in scaling some of these capabilities out. And we're talking about fractions of the investment cost that we would need to do if we would not have a scalable, reusable capability.
Yeah. Tell me a little bit more about the digital planning system that you put in place. What was the result of having that and how did you implement that?
So it's a big thing, the digital planning system, right? And it's different for every BU. Some of us are actually still looking at detailed scheduling, and we are trying to do that to make sure that through data we can produce in a better way. And I think probably the most important discussion we had was not really about the system or whatever, but it was more about what are the KPIs that we use to manage our plants. And we were used to kind of like measuring OEE, so the plant need to be kind of like running 24/7 and so on. But we saw that created disconnects with what we needed to sell into the market, and sometimes our plants were just basically making the wrong things. But they were doing quite well from a KPI perspective. So then, with all of that data coming in, we could change the KPIs and we could make it much more sales oriented. So that OEE is obviously still important because we need to spread out our fixed cost over as much product as possible. But it's not the driving force anymore. We kind of like, are much more in sync with what the market demands, and we're making what the market actually wants at that point in time, which is crucial for our working capital mechanisms and crucial for the outcome of how much inventory we have, but also how fast we can deliver with certain goods for a certain customer.
Okay. Let's talk about the customer. I mean, you said that one of the drivers was the demand from customers for more flexible and I can imagine digital systems. So tell me a little bit about that process that you went through and the kind of systems that you implemented there.
That was probably the second hardest thing to do because it was, I came from banking and I came from pharmaceuticals before. There was a much more focused approach on patients or on clients, whereas in Bekaert was actually, and maybe still is a little bit more a product out company, and we were not really that in sync with the needs of our customers, and we needed to change that because we knew that some of these behaviors would change over time as well, and there would be much more competition. Hence, our customers would have much more choice in how they would basically procure. So we were looking at how can we create an experience for a customer that is different, that we call it enlightening the customer. I don't know whether we are actually enlightening, but at least our experience is much better than it was before, because now we are much more online. Customers can actually check on their statuses. They can look at, even today, I think we deployed a system where a customer can actually design a sling. A sling is something which is used in the mining industry. It's very specific, custom built, and typically, the customer has a hard time figuring out what the requirements are. But online now, the customer can build exactly to its own requirements the model of sling that we need to deliver and can check when we can deliver it. It's a totally new experience, which is just in a regular buying conversation. I think where the biggest thing for us comes into play is that we are bringing innovation into very conservative markets. That means that we feel that we have very performant products, particularly also from a sustainability perspective. But sometimes we have issues with the application of those products into the market because architects or other players into the market are really very conservative. So we needed to think about a little bit like a healthcare company and started to think about, so who are the key opinion leaders? Who do we need to influence? Where are the standards set? Where are we bringing those products into standards? Which is not really a direct buying conversation like a portal, but we started to kind of like work much more on those communities and providing information and being much more vocal through our online systems in those discussions to push standards and to push the adoption of our own products. Overlooked, but I think critically important because that's where the new leads come from and that's where the new business comes from.
Okay, so we talked about production, we talked about planning in production, we talked about customer platforms. Let's talk about product innovation and the role of AI and IoT solutions in there.
The hardest one, to be honest, really the hardest one. You need to think about, how do you bring value to a customer? And when you think about digitally enabled products, you typically go into service models. You look at data, getting at data, and then kind of like, doing something with that data that is meaningful for your customer. And we tried in many segments, like for instance in automotive, we had really great plans for our product as well, but we also figured out quite quickly that there are big players in that automotive market who exactly had the same plans, and they were a little bit more bullish, I would say, in putting money into some of these plans. So we needed to carefully select where is the niche market that we could actually go into with such a product. And we selected basically a solution where we can do much more concise predictive maintenance for some of our ropes. Our ropes are used across the world, but I'll give you an example. It's used for mooring of drilling platforms, but it's also used on all the ships of Jan de Nul and Deme to make sure that poles are anchored. And obviously those ships are on sea, and whenever they need to come into a harbor, it's lost time. And so we need to ensure that the cable is one fit for purpose. And secondly, if something's wrong, that we know that exactly immediately and that we can do something about it. So we built a solution, and it was actually part of an acquisition, an early acquisition, small acquisition of ours, where we invested in Vision AI. And we now perfected that into a component where you have a little bit of a camera system with 3 cameras rolling over the cable and doing 3 types of quality controls. The typical quality control is by using magnetic resonance and just seeing whether there are any cracks. But it also now starts to look visually at certain things and brings Vision AI into that and combines that into a way that we can be really precise how long that rope is actually going to last. And then you can think about, well, what's the big deal, right? But in all of these industries, safety is paramount. And so when the full supply chain delivers, they always put a safety element on projects. So there's safety on safety on safety. And then you start to think about, well, but then if you can lower that down, you can have life acceptancy or expectancy of a rope for another 6 months. That's a big deal for some of these ships. It's a big deal in their P&L. And that's where we have that on the ships, we have that into the market, and we are toying with that business model now. But technically we have that. So we know now how to do Vision AI somewhere in the middle of the ocean, stream that into a cloud and make that available on a port, not on a ship, but on a port for someone to look at an issue that our AI will mention in a report to an engineer to make sure that it takes a look at the cable.
Yeah, that's quite innovative. Huh? I wouldn't think of something like that. I mean, how can you be innovative with steel wire and steel rope? That's not an easy thing, right?
That's actually why it was so hard, I think, because in certain industries, innovation is just, it's easy. In some of the markets where we are, and we are not so close to the customer, you really need to think very hard on, you can do a lot of things with technology, but of course you need to make sure that it's in the benefit of your customer and that your customer wants to pay for it. And then it becomes really a niche play.
Okay, Gunter, we talked about modernizing MES, system, digital planning, customer platforms, and even doing product innovation with AI and IoT solutions on wires and ropes and so on with vision tech. Let's also go maybe a step below that. You also modernize the enterprise backbone. Can you walk us through the different elements in there and how you executed them?
Yeah, when I talk about enterprise backbone, I'm typically referring to finance, HR, procurement. And to be honest, I don't know whether it's truly digital transformation, but I did need to take care of some technical debt. And, it was easier to actually embed that into our digital transformation as well, and to start to reimagine some of these processes. But at the same time, just take care of technical debt because we hadn't invested that much into those pivotal systems. And actually, when I started to think about it, I was like, yeah, well, we'll just do these things. We will get too much value out of that. But it's proven not to be true, to be honest, because I'll just give you one example. We were one SAP system. Everyone was on SAP. And that worked great. And we hadn't done too many M&As. Now, I did create a more flexible finance architecture, if you want, with a central finance system from SAP, which gives us more flexibility. And that came in handy because halfway through the journey, we not only did a digital transformation, but more from an enterprise perspective, we needed to dramatically shift the portfolio. And that meant divesting pieces of the business, but also acquiring other pieces of the business. And I must admit, I was very, very glad that we had invested into that modular, more flexible finance infrastructure, because some of the pains that I had in J&J in integrating companies or carving out were actually quickly resolved in Bekaert. So we were able to, kind of like carve out businesses very easily and hand them over to a better owner. But I think more importantly, we acquired some smaller businesses that were not on SAP. And until then, we should probably have asked, you need to be on SAP, you need to do this and that. And then we would have killed those businesses. For now, we had, from a business perspective, we had the option to actually make them integrated from a consolidation perspective and everything which they needed to do from a compliance perspective, regulatory perspective, but at the same time do not burden that P&L with systems and with costs that they could not afford, which was really important for the success of these M&As because we wanted to actually have them grow in the way that they came in. So although it was taking care of technical debt, I will say that I think we also got some very flexible options out of that, particularly in finance, particularly also in procurement. And today we have not done yet. We are still doing our SAP for HANA transformation. As we speak, next year we will move everything of our ECC into SAP for HANA. And then I think finally we could say that all of the enterprise systems are more or less future ready, done, and dusted, and we will obviously need to invest to keep them there. But most of the heavy lifting has been done.
Okay. Now we started by saying that Bekaert is more than 100 years old. So that means there must be a lot of legacy in all different levels of the company, IT not excluded, I can imagine. So what is your strategy on managing legacy and technical debt? And I mean, you have put in place quite a number of new systems, of course, but there still must be quite some technical debt out there. Do you have a specific budgets for that, or what's your approach there?
Yeah, I think I'm lucky. So remember when the starting point to say is that we were running behind from a digital perspective. That has a side effect that there's not a lot of legacy. So there's obviously some legacy, but one SAP system, you can call it legacy, but it's not really legacy. And auxiliary systems, not that much. So my technical debt is actually quite under control. My biggest problem, though, is the technical debt, if you want, in our plants. We have plants where there are machines that are 50 years old and older. Bekaert is an engineering company. We make our own machines. Mm-hmm. In the age of IoT, connected systems, closed loop processes, trying to get AI into that doesn't really help. So I think that's been our biggest pain point is how do you connect these old machines into a modern IoT-like infrastructure that allows you to do AI. And we've spent a lot of time to figure that out. We went hardwire at first, but that kind of like, we couldn't afford it. And we've done some 5G now in China, what works very well. We're on the new Wi-Fi standard. It took us a long time to actually get that done in a cost-effective manner. But I think we are there. So we have a solution. We have an architecture. We just need to run it by all of the plants.
Okay. Now yourself, you come from a banking pharma background. There must be quite a journey to learn how a big production company works as well. No.
Yeah, agreed. I think the only thing which I think I had in favor of myself is that, okay, J&J is absolutely a healthcare company, but it's probably also the largest supply chain company in the world. So supply chain plans, I actually knew. But I think this product is very different. And operating into a B2B cycle where you're very far away from the end customer was probably the biggest thing that I had to adjust to. And I talked about it a little bit as well, but it's been very rewarding. I think also I've learned, banks and healthcare have different budgets than industrial companies. So I've learned to actually do more with less. Is a lesson that I probably wouldn't have learned if I would have stayed in healthcare and in banking.
Yeah. Now you've built scalable architecture across operational systems and customer systems and data platforms and S4HANA and AI pipelines and security by design is in there as well. I can imagine. How crucial was the architectural foundation in really accelerating delivery and reducing technical debt and enabling reuse across the organization?
Yeah, paramount. It was something that actually maybe even slowed the start of the transformation down because we wanted to be sure. So remember, for the people listening, there was one SAP system. That was almost it. And that really wasn't fit for purpose for a digital transformation. So we needed to build new capabilities on new platforms. There's a whole cultural view on the IT department around that. We can talk about that as well. But then there is being sure that you make the right choices on the platforms that you choose. At the beginning, we've spent, particularly on the commercial side, we spent a long time making sure that we were making the right choices, making sure that we had the right vendors at the right price point, but also making sure that it was modular and that we could rapidly move into reuse, because that was the only point where I could make it affordable for our different business units. So I think we spent probably 9 to 12 months architectural review in the beginning. And yes, making sure that we make the right choices. And we were building already on some of these things, but not kind of like on force. And after 9 months, we were sure we had the right components and we were basically going. We continuously...
Go ahead.
Yeah, we continuously update that. I mean, I'm not so much a big fan of an architecture for 10 years out. I think today, with the speed how everything is moving, I'm already glad that I understand what's going to be available in the next 2 years. And that may be stretching it already a little bit with AI, to be honest. Yeah. But we do have a keen eye on trying to predict the next 3 years and what technologies are making sense for us. There are technologies that we just have let pass by. There are things like the metaverse. At a certain point, we didn't engage into that. Although we could have done that with our customers, we didn't engage. So we are continuously making those decisions from a leadership team on what we invest in. And I think now, particularly with the advent of AI and then particularly Gen AI, I think we are now rethinking, or at least looking again, whether our current architectural choices are the right ones for the future as well. So it's a continuous exercise that we're doing. So
architecture is a continuous exercise, something that you have to revisit every 3, 6, 12 months at least. But when you started with something like that, how do you do that? Was that your sole work, or did you get in some? Was it done together with business people, with the IT team that was there, or did you bring in some specialist consultants? How do you built a first architectural roadmap for a transformation like that?
We didn't bring in a consultant, but when I came in, and I didn't do it on my own as well, because I'm definitely not the top architect. But what I was able to do is kind of like change a little bit the team when I came in as well, and I recruited a couple of folks that had that skill set from bigger companies as well, like from Unilever, and that kind of like came with such an architecture first approach. And we formed like a team of only 3-4 people that talked a lot to our business to understand what business capabilities that we needed, and then talked a lot to vendors to understand what the offering was. And I must also say that I will comment my procurement organization as well, because sometimes they're kind of like looked at as a pain in the ass for acquiring software. But my business partner actually helps us a lot in running RFPs so that they don't become a nuisance, but that you actually get information out of the capabilities of platforms that are presenting themselves. So I think with that group of people, we make those decisions. We are tuning that again now, because I think I'm bringing in a little bit more younger people in right now to kind of like challenge us from an AI perspective, and to challenge us a little bit more on, are we still buying platforms, integrating platforms, or should we start to build? And if so, should we start to build in a novel way with AI at the pinnacle of it? And I think it's the jury is still out, but at least we are having that conversation today.
So there's a new buy or build discussion going on, which is interesting, because I can imagine in your environment, it's a buy and integrate strategy by default, no?
5 years, I've done buy and integrate, by 5 years. But I truly believe that, and I had that already in J&J, where we started to think about, just diffracting platforms into microservices that create value and that are agile, fast, but that also have a very, maybe not even a long lifetime. And I'm starting now to rethink that with everything which has to do with AI and vibe coding and the availability of the Power Platform in our case as well, to maybe create something which is even faster, which still will integrate on the data layer, but that doesn't necessarily integrate on the application layer, and that probably, but again, the jury is out, is less expensive from a TCO perspective.
Now let's talk a little bit about stakeholder value. I mean, you had to create not only a technology shift, but a mind shift as well. So you had to convince quite a number of people. I mean, from top down, I can imagine. So what's your secret sauce of creating that, or changing the mindset to become more digital mindset?
Well, the first secret sauce was to turn the IT organization from a cost mindset into a value mindset. So that was the first thing. So I needed to make sure that my people were not order takers, that were trying to like just kind of like getting something and then at a minimal cost trying to actually give something back and don't worry about what the value is. Took a long time, by the way, and it's still ongoing. But we created profiles, we created programs to make sure that every IT person at a certain level talks about value. And actually to the point even that we challenge at this point in time applications, and we'll say we'll retire where the business doesn't want to retire. And we are basically then kind of like having a value conversation around it. So it needed to start by looking at that value. Then and value is the only thing that I can sell to the company. My cost is abundantly available and abundantly challenged. I don't need to do anything about that. My business can do that very, very well. But the value conversation is different. So we bring that value conversation. And then the thing I learned in my career, and then particularly which we now practiced in Bekaert as well, is to actually at the beginning we agreed upon a value convention. Because you know how that goes, right? You have all of those functions and they come with their programs, and then they do a status report and they say, oh, we've created so much value. And then every BU leader starts to roll his eyes because they're basically saying like, sorry, but I don't see it in my P&L. That's a typical conversation. So we wanted to avoid that by just agreeing with our executive committee on what the value convention would be and when we actually define value realized. And that was a conversation of about 3 months. When we concluded that, we were agreed upon how we would measure value, and we never had a conversation anymore whether it showed up in the P&L or whether it didn't show up in the P&L, but we were agreed on the value. And then that made it much easier to look at business cases and to do a very specialized ROI on that and making sure that we made the right conversations. Okay. We are obsessed about value, to be honest. We are obsessed about value.
And so your advice to people out there is make sure that you define exactly what value is for everybody in the company.
Yes. I see it so much even when I'm, on the executive committee, and we're not even talking about digital, but every individual function comes, and of course and I think they are right, they probably are creating that value, but then to track that one-on-one into P&Ls, and sometimes they're talking about a cost avoidance, sometimes it's a saving, avoidance doesn't show up. So I think, you need to speak the same language. Once you speak the same language, you can have an intelligent conversation.
Yeah. Now, all the transformation that you've done, there must have been quite a financial impact. I don't know how much you want to talk about that, but what are also the longer term capabilities that have been created over the last couple of years?
There were immediate impacts on various products. I think the longer term actually is that we've now been able, through that transformation, to be much more in control of our data landscape. Obviously, we wanted that, and I think the biggest longer-term value that I see right now is that we are probably capable at this point in time to deploy an AI strategy, and to do that on data which we understand, which is curated, and which we trust. I'm talking about the structured data, not the unstructured data. We are doing that now with unstructured data, but at least we've got that under our belt, that we understand that and we can reuse that. I never thought about it at the beginning, to be honest. I thought about the data architecture, but at that point in time, 5 years ago, I couldn't imagine that AI would be so fast and would probably be so impactful. But now I'm very glad that as a byproduct, we've created an asset that will actually provide us much more value going forward, probably at a lower price than we had anticipated.
Okay. Now, if we take our crystal ball here and we look forward to the next 3-5 years, where do you see the biggest opportunities for AI in your type of organization?
There are two, basically, I think, and at different parts of the spectrum. I will start with the obvious one. It's just in effectiveness and efficiency. And I think that's where I'm going at with, I'm as of the 1st of January, I also lead our shared services. That means, that we've taken a stance to not create a shared service as only labor arbitrage, but we want to re-envision a software shared service, which obviously it will leverage automation, AI, it will leverage all sorts of technologies, but at least a software-defined shared service. We talked about a software-defined data center, a software-defined in IT. Well, I think the next bet is a software-defined shared service center that will use AI. And obviously there will be people involved into that, but it will look very different. It will be much more effective and much more efficient to run it as well. So that's kind of like people think about in the back office when I talked about the enterprise, but we're also looking like how do we again now look at how we multi-channel with our customer and how do we rethink that, because I'm very glad that we have the portals, but I don't know what the end date of a portal will be in a conversation with AI on the table in a B2B type of context. So also there we are re-envisioning how that looks like. So that, I call that the motor, the engine of things. The second piece I think where we are betting on is more on the revenue side and probably a little bit more difficult again, but it's figuring out when you look at the M&A, when you look at strategy, when you look at new revenue streams, markets, and so on, is the knowledge management around that. It's still very fractured into the company, and I have great hopes that we can actually bring advances into that, be much more intelligent, be able to crunch much more data, updated data, to actually help us from a strategic perspective in where the company can go, and in scenario planning around that. What are the scenarios that work best? Like, for instance, if you know the Chinese 5-year plan, there's a lot of information in there on what you might do or maybe not should do. And those things are limited to a couple of people in the company, maybe let's say 20, 30 high-level C people. But I think thinking differently about it and creating different knowledge around that will create different strategies, different scenarios, and will lead, I think, to different paths on how the company will evolve.
Okay, super. Now, you've been leading IT, and now you also taking on shared services. What exactly is in there? Is that finance, facilities?
Yeah, it's finance.
What kind of services?
Today it's finance, HR, and procurement. And each of them have their own, until now, their own functional approach around this. So the first one, of course, is to harmonize that. The second one, of course, is to figure out how to get efficiency out that fast. That could go with technology, but it could also go with labor arbitrage. So there needs to be a sequence plan into that. And then to roll in other type of processes, like, for instance, customer service or other things, and start to re-envision certain things.
So you mentioned labor arbitrage. What is your sourcing strategy in IT today, and how do you see? Have you seen that evolve, and do you think it will change in the future?
We were actually, when I started, we were only with one outsourcer, and then over the next 5 years, now until now, we've differentiated that a little bit. So we went, instead of to one outsourcer, we went to the best of breed, if you want. And now I think we are working with 3 to 4 outsourcers that has their own pains. I would say we are fairly outsourced. So I think 2/3 of the IT folks are actually outsourced. We have, at the beginning of the digital transformation, we defined which roles we would need. And we also defined which roles we would like to keep inside, based upon whether they were important, like architects or whatever, or whether we want to harvest that skill set internally. But then even there, my delivery is out of India, China, and a little bit out of Belgium. And then all the other roles, which are also equally important, but that we didn't want to have on the payroll, are with outsourcers. So we've been really kind of like fanatic around, what do we want to keep inside? What don't we want to keep inside? And then also, what do we want to train? And what do we want to leave to an outsourcer? And I think probably we're going to do that same exercise on shared services right now, to make sure that we understand what do we want to own ourselves payroll-wise, and what do we want to actually give to a partner who has a bench, and so on. Now, of course, there's also evolution in that space. I mean, if you go to India, the outsourcers of today have their own problems, retention problems, and so on. And so you need to have a governance layer on top of that. But I stay committed to that model.
Okay, and so and you said 21,000 people in the company. How big is IT in such a company these days?
So one third of the total contingent internally is 250 people.
200. So in total, 700 plus 750 people that are working day in on the digital. Okay, very good. Now
and also on cybersecurity. Also on cybersecurity, because we didn't really talk about that, because a large part is cybersecurity. In the digital transformation, I always talked about, when I talked to the board, I was like, we have the opportunity with technology, new technologies. We have the opportunity with use cases. We need to change how we do things. But then the fourth petal of a Clover 4 was, we need to protect ourselves. Because if we're going to open up from a company that is only on SAP to someone that is integrated, multi-products, multi-platforms, opening up to customers and vendors, we are going to be exposed. So we've run, as a digital transformation, a very robust cybersecurity program. We continue to do that.
What does that mean? Does that mean you implemented a zero trust model, or
we are in the process of implementing zero trust, but we implemented a lot of tools. We spend a lot of awareness trainings, because obviously people are the weakest links, but we also work with a lot of partners to make sure that we can be penetrated. So we throw some money at that, including insurance, because we know that we are at risk. And even in the last 3 weeks, being a Belgian company, it feels like, we don't have only drones flying around on our airports, but I can actually say that the hacking attempts have increased incredibly over the last couple of weeks. And I'm very glad that we've beefed up our security from that perspective as well.
Okay, let's talk a little bit more about your personal leadership and the human side of big transformations like this. And so you had to lead this major mindset shift. Can you share a moment where it was really challenging? I mean, in an engineering company like you have there, and where you had to change behaviors and beliefs, and where data eventually proved that the new way was the better way.
Yeah, and it was all over the place, Hendrik, like I said. I think the most difficult time that we faced was you obviously you can do a lot from an IT and a digital perspective, but you need your business partners to actually commit as well. And with a top-down approach, sometimes they committed on paper, but they really didn't commit. And I think just making sure that you can change that into a team where you would walk into a room and that you kind of like cannot distinguish between a person, whether it's an IT person or a business person. That's when I get proud. Then I'd say, okay, we've reached success over here, because now they're talking to each other, not against each other, and we're going to move forward. But that wasn't always the case. So it took a while, and in many regions it was more difficult than others. I faced a lot of headwinds with that, to kind of like break the traditional way of thinking, like IT is there, we're over here, and the only thing which we're going to do is finger point. And that was, I think, the most difficult one to overcome, particularly because you can have all of the consensus at the executive level or even the M+1 level, but then when you need to implement that somewhere into a business, the dynamics are still a little bit different.
Yeah, I created quite a success with this big transformation, but we all make our mistakes now and again. Could you share with us what your best mistake was in all this transformation, what you learned from it?
Yeah, I think if you ask my current boss, it's probably the top-down approach, because it was the one that I had the most conversation with around what a mistake would be. I still think we needed to do that. I think there are choices where with a top-down approach, we needed to retire capabilities because they didn't work. And particularly in customer, we had a couple of those that really didn't work. And we needed to take a tough choice on retiring them. When you do that though, and when you're honest to say, yeah, okay, I did it top down, I might have been wrong, it kind of like doesn't work. It also enables the next step that we needed to set, so that you can have a more balanced dialogue and moving from top down into a handshake, because you show vulnerability as well, right? When you say kind of like, I'm the leader of the digital transformation, I know everything. And then you kind of like say, well, after 3 years, maybe that asset is not performing like it was supposed to. Let's just take it offline and maybe have a conversation around how do we redeploy the funds. And that was kind of, I think, pivotal to moving from top down into where we are today. And today, I cannot fulfill the demand. I mean, we kind of like, from a company perspective, we kind of like define what we want to spend from a P&L and affordability perspective. But if I do the bottom up now with my business units and with my functions, I'm over that budget every year. And every year we have prioritization issues. So I think it was a mistake. I admitted to some of those mistakes, and I think it helped in creating more trust and a different dynamic.
Okay, so for now, let's talk a little bit about your leadership style. If I would ask your team to describe that now after 5 years, and you were not in the room, if they had to describe your leadership style, what do you think that they would say?
They would probably say that I can be rather controlling until someone earns my trust. And once I have trust in people, they will probably say that I'm empowering and that I have their back in delivering. We make, at least, I think they would probably say that we make mistakes jointly and that we own up with them jointly as well. So I think that's probably what they would say. They would probably also say that I'm extremely pushy and that I'm impatient.
Gunter, what is it that in your work and in your life that really gives you energy?
That's a really good question, and when you're at the age where I am, you start to think about that a little bit more as well. And certainly, when I changed from J&J into Bekaert, you start to think about like, what is it that I want to achieve, and what makes me tick. And frankly, I think what makes me tick is change. So I don't like status quo anywhere, and I love trying to think about things, to do some things differently, and to create an impact with that. And I feel that within this job, and actually as a CIO, we are, yeah, incredibly fortunate and privileged to be in this age in that type of job, because with the technology speed, there's no better place to be, because you can impact change. You can think about so many different ways to do certain things that you can have a blast every day. And I think that's also why I think that in the boardrooms, CIOs become more important than some other C-level functions over time. And I see it with some of our colleagues as well. You can seize that opportunity. You can actually embrace change, and you can bring some of your acumens, which are, again, for me, it should be rooted into business strategy and into value, but you can bring that technology to bear to do things differently. And that makes me tick every day.
Okay. Now, if you would not have become digital leader or CIO, what was the alternative path that you might have chosen?
Yeah, that's interesting. I think I actually did quite well at school, but you will notice there is this body at a certain point that gives you advice on what you wanted to do. And I come from a farmer's background, and so I was obsessed with everything which had to do with farming. So they said like he needs to go to the agriculture school. And then someone said like maybe his grades are a little bit too high to do that, so let's try something else. And now when I kind of like look back at that, I think like bioengineering, something like that, which didn't really exist when I went to university, would probably make me tick. And even if I now think about a career or even a business as an entrepreneur to start something, I still fancy technology into agriculture and what that could be.
You still like to go outside and work in the garden, or not at all?
I do, but I'm also a big bonsai fanatic. So I have lots of bonsais as well, which it's a nice way of. It's you need to be concentrated to work on a bonsai, and it's a nice way to kind of like empty your mind as well and put some stuff behind you. So, but I think anyway, if I would do something, it would be entrepreneurial. I always try to do change. But yeah, I wouldn't mind looking at the food industry and the agriculture industry and see how technology could make a profound impact on that. It's already doing that, but I think there can still be more impact.
Now, we're coming to the last couple of questions, and let's return back to the business first. I mean, what do you see as the next big challenge, and then also the next big opportunities with inside Bekaert that you are excited about?
We have a lot of challenges, to be honest, and I think every industrial company today has challenges. I think you see we had COVID and we had the supply chain crisis. Now we have all of the tariffs, trying to figure out how that will work out. Europe is trying to get into the game. If you're a steel producer, there's legislation coming, which is nice, but not if you're kind of like buying from a steel producer. So we have challenges. We are confronted with China with overproduction capacity. And I think, the opportunity for Bekaert at this point in time is we've been very successful in 130 years with the products that we currently have. Mm-hmm. The biggest opportunity now is to figure out how are we going to almost reskin the company into different types of business that we are currently not doing. That might not even be the products that we do. I'd started to say that we are still a transformation company, but we are now looking at other types of materials to also transform. So I think that's the biggest opportunity. Not easy, but the biggest opportunity now for Bekaert is to figure out what are the next chapters of growth over the next 30 years. And that's probably not in the products that we have today. It will need to come from other products.
Okay, so for now, last question. If another CIO, technology leader, were to start a similar transformation that you have been leading over the last 5 years? I mean, different apps, architecture, operations, customer engagement, innovation, and so on. What's the advice that you would give to such a leader starting on a journey like this?
Multiple things that that comes to mind. First one is don't do anything which doesn't gel with your business strategy. If it doesn't fit with your business strategy, just don't even think about it. In my opinion, you can only transfer the cost conversation into a value conversation if the business is going to recognize your value, and they will only do that if it fits into their strategy. So make sure that you have an incredible anchoring between whatever transformation you want to do and your business strategy. I think the second piece is understand your culture very well and understand what type of culture you then need for a transformation, and assess very honestly how easy or difficult it's going to be to actually get there. Once you've done that, it will give you incredible insights on how fast you can travel. And how fast you can travel is paramount in your own credibility. The last thing you want to do is overpromise. The third one is look at your team and just make sure that you have like 4 or 5 people that you can trust inequivocally. You can just basically trust. You cannot do this yourself. You need to have people that can actually, do things for you. One could be an architect, or at least a committee that looks at how you structure your architectural designs. But there's other things. I've been one that relentlessly works after everyone with value and talks to every business leader about the value. That role didn't exist. We created that. I'm very happy that I had that role. So you need 4 or 5 of these key personnel that you can trust and that can do the job for you. And then I think the last one is make sure that you're resilient. And if you start now, I would really, really start to think about architectural choices and agility. And I would probably even start to think about, is it still a game of scaling? Yes or no? And the second piece I would think about is how long is your time horizon for certain capabilities? Because I come from a world and grew up in a world that the time horizon for a capability is 10 years, But I think the time horizon is changing dramatically. And that if you have a different time horizon, then your architecture needs to be different as well. And I think you should certainly now think very wisely about that if you start today.
Okay. And on that note, Gunter, thank you so much for the nice conversation of today. Looking forward to seeing you face to face very soon again.
Thank you very much, Hendrik. Thanks for the conversation.